Good afternoon. On behalf of the Arts Commission, I'm happy to welcome you to the Cathedral this afternoon to the second in our Lenten Arts series. We encourage you to come back next 3 Sunday afternoons for the performances. They are listed in your program, and please note that next Sunday's performance will begin at 4:30. Restrooms, if needed, are located at the end of the breezeway. And again, we are so happy that you're here. Now, let us travel back in time to visit with Harriet Tubman. It's 20 years after the Civil War, and she's living in Auburn, New York, but she still travels telling the stories of her life to help raise money for the women's right to vote. She will take questions after her presentation. So as you listen, be thinking of things you may want to ask her. Please welcome Mrs. Harriet Tubman.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Bryant, and thanks to all of you for being here. Now, she introduced me as Miss Harriet Tubman, and I'll certainly answer to that, but that's not my name anymore. I got married again about, 7-10 years ago to a young man. I got me a young man 20 years younger than I am, Nelson Charles Davis. So that's my name now, Harriet Davis. And I'll still answer to Miss Tubman. And I also answer to some other things like Moses. People white and black call me Moses because like the Moses in the Bible, I led my people from slavery into freedom. I also answer to General John Brown. He's the one who calls me General. He started that because he said I was the most of a man that he ever met. But my parents, Ben and Harriet Ross, Harriet Green and Ben Ross, they named me Araminta. And people who knew me from when I was little, they call me Minty. And I was born to them on the eastern shore of Maryland, born into slavery. Now don't let anybody tell you there's anything good about slavery. It cannot be justified. It is not right in any way. And slavery is next to hell. It is misery. Now, I was born in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and for us there, the worst thing about slavery was that we could be sold south. You see, in 1808, our country passed a law that you could no longer do the slave trade, bringing in slaves from Africa. But all them cotton plantations and rice plantations, all that going on there in the deep south, and they still needed that slave labor. Now up in Maryland, didn't have those big plantations, but our masters, but they would raise us like we was livestock. And Georgia traders would come up to Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky. They called them states breeder states because they were breeding slaves. And these Georgia traders, they weren't all from Georgia, and they didn't all take us to Georgia, but we called them that. Them Georgia traders would come up and buy us and then take us down to the deep south and sell us again for a profit. And when somebody was sold south, you didn't see them again. You know, we'd all heard about them plantations and how they treated slaves in that deep south. And when somebody was sold south, you didn't know if they made it to the south or what kind of massa or what kind of work they be doing down there. You didn't know if they survived, and when they died, you didn't know where they was laid to rest, or if they even took the trouble to bury them decent. You got family. You can't imagine what it's like to have somebody sold away like that. No, you never wanted to be sold south. But that didn't mean I grew up always with my family. You see, Massa Broadus, that's my master's name, he needed to make money off all them slaves that were being birthed on his plantations, so he would rent us out and make money off of us that way. First time I was rented out, I was 5 years old. And they rented me out to Massa Cook. I didn't know what was going on. They took me to the barn and found a big old feed sack, cut out the corners and a big hole in the middle and put it over me. And that was the first clothes I'd had. And then they took me over and put me up on the horse in front of Massa Cook. And my mama come over to me and said, "Now, Minty, this here man's your master now. You got to do everything he say." Yes, and Massa Cook rode off with me. No. It was the first time when we got to his house that I'd ever seen white people eating. He took me right into the dining room to show his family what he had bought. Now, Miss Cook, she was nice. She asked me, "Minty, would you like some sweet milk to drink?" And I lied. I told her, "No, I don't like sweet milk." I like sweet milk as much as any child. But because I lied that first night, I didn't enjoy any for the 2 years I was with them. Now, they rented me to learn how to work the loom, but not only was I 5 years old, I was a little runny 5-year-old, and I couldn't begin to move that loom and weave anything for them. So they set me to setting muskrat traps. You know, they live in the bank of the river, and I'd have to go along the river and set the traps and check them every morning. I didn't have much clothes or much food, and I got pretty sick. And when you get sick and you rent it like that, they just decide she ain't worth a penny. So they took me on back to Massa Broadus, and I was sick. I couldn't do nothing. But my mama, she nursed me back to health. See, she learned all them herbs and things from her mama who come from Africa. And she taught me some of that, and I was able to help people that I know and take care of now in Auburn, but also during the Civil War when I was down there in the Department of the South in South Carolina. Yes. She nursed me back to health, but I got rented out again right away. And this time, Miss Susan, oh, she was a mean old thing. She couldn't start her day without coming up and finding me where I was sleeping and beating on me. Minty, get up where you sleeping now. Because I finally learned that if I put papers and rags and things under my clothes, she could beat me and it would hurt so much. And then when she'd leave out, I would take those things out, and then I'd get to work. Well, she had me working in the house and taking care of her babies. And I was the one who had to keep the baby quiet, because she wouldn't stop to nurse it or wake up and take care of it. She'd beat me if that baby cried, woke her up. Well, I wasn't the only one she was mean to, though. She was arguing with her husband in the dining room when I was cleaning and dusting off the table, and she was there arguing with him. And that little bowl of sugar cubes was right there on the table, and I decided I was going to get myself a little bit of sweetness, and I put it in my mouth just when she looked over and see me. Well, she grabbed her little whip off the hearth and started chasing me around the room. I ran out of that house, down to the road, and did not stop to look back to see how close she was. I just stopped when I couldn't run any farther. And I was right there at a farm that had a pig pen, a big old sow with piglets. And I went in there and I hid. I stayed there for 5 days, trying to find stuff to eat that the pigs left over and trying to hide out from them and stay warm. And I couldn't take it after 5 days. So I went back to Miss Susan, and she gave me a beating like I knew she would, but then they took me back to Massa Broadus. And my mama, she got me healthy and strong again. And then they stopped renting me out to houses and things. Massa Broadus let me work in the field. And I liked that. No more women hanging over me, beating me with their little whips and yelling at me. I got to eat my mama's cooking. Sometimes I even got to work for my daddy over Massa Thompson's place. And I grew strong. But I got hurt. And I was about 11, maybe 12. You see, I was working for Massa Barnett, and he sent me down to the general store down there at Best Pitch Ferry and Bucktown Road and Cambridge Road, and I went down there. And as I was going into the store, I see this slave boy running up towards the store, and he was followed by a white man. And it might have been his master, but most likely it was the overseer. And that boy, he run into the store right in front of me, and I followed him on in there and watched as that white man chased him round the store until that boy, he started to run out the door again. And that man said, "Hey, stop him! Stop that boy!" I wasn't going to try and stop that boy if he could get away from that man. So that man, he picked up a big lead weight to throw it at that boy as he went out the door. But he didn't throw too good. Didn't make it that far, and it hit me upside my head. And I fell out. And when I come to, I was at Massa Barnett's, laying there on the bench in front of his loom, and there's a slave boy sitting next to me. And he said, Minty, Massa been waiting for you to wake up. Here's your hoe. He wants you out in the field as soon as you can get there. So I picked up my hoe and I went out and I tried to work, but my legs give out. And I fell, and they took me back to Massa Broadus. And my mama, she took care of me. And that's when I found out that there was a big old hole just about in my head. You know, I was wearing a rag on my head like this, but not so nice as I got this one fixed up. And they had to wash it and pull threads of that scarf out of my head. They said there was a big old crack and a big old dent in there. And it probably would have killed me if it hadn't been for my hair. You see, there I was, 11, 12 years old. My hair had never been cut. Sat out like a bushel basket on my head. And it never been brushed, and it never been washed. If my hands were dirty from work or from eating, I would just wipe 'em on my hair. And it was that thick, nappy, dirty hair that kept that lead weight from killing me. Well, I'm glad I survived, because I went back to work outside. And I met my husband, John Tubman, who's a free man, and we married. And I thought that was going to be my life, working outside, being married to John, having babies. And you know, some of them masters, they can be kind to you and let you keep a little bit of money. So I was saving up money, and I would buy myself a calf or a little pig and grow it and then sell it. And kept making money that way, because I wanted to buy my freedom, be like my husband, John. And I thought that was going to be my life till I was about 27 years old. And Master Broadus, he died. And his Miss Liza Ann, she didn't run that plantation so well. And when Christmas was coming on one year, word come to the quarters that she needed to sell some people south to pay her debts. And she was looking at two of my brothers and me. No, we did not want to be sold south. So we decided to run. And we left that night. It was some night in October, so it was starting to get a little cool. And we was out for maybe 2-3 nights. And my brothers got scared. They said, "Oh, Minty, we should go back. We can hear them dogs. They're getting closer every day. No. We'll go back now." And Miss Liza Ann, she would treat us right, a little beating or something. But she wanted to take care of us, and she won't kill us. So I went back with them. And as soon as I got back to Master Broadus plantation, I knew that I was going to run. And I made the decision to do it on my own. My brothers, they proved to me they couldn't do it. And if I let my mama know what I was going to do, she'd raise such a ruckus I'd never be able to get away from there. And I had heard about that Underground Railroad. I heard there was a white lady nearby who would help fugitive slaves run away. I had no proof, but that was the talk all through the slave quarters. So one night, I decided that's the night. The moon was not arising. It was dark, real dark. And I went to the big house, and I told my mama, "You go on back to the quarters. I'll clean up for you here in the kitchen." And when she is gone, it was just Mary and me. We was cleaning up. We headed out, and I decided I needed to tell Mary what I was planning to do. Somebody needed to be able to know and tell my mama the next day what had happened to me. And we were standing there talking when who should come riding up the road but Master Thompson. And he nodded at us, and we said, "Evening, Master." And he looked at us and then went on his way to the big house. Now, he didn't say nothing or do nothing. And I know that God must have just shut his mind or blinded his eyes, because he knew just a few days before I'd come back with my brothers. But he didn't say nothing to me. Mary went on to the quarters, and I turned around and went on out to the road. And I found that white lady's house. And she took me in. And the next day, she gave me a note and told me where to go that next day. And so I followed her directions. And when I got to that next lady's house, I knocked on the door, and she came up, saw me. She was mad at me coming up to the front door like that. But she took that paper from my hand, and she read it, and then she tore it up. And she said, you see that broom over there? I want you to get that broom and sweep down this walkway right now. And I don't want to see a speck of dirt or a pebble or anything on it. And I thought, oh my goodness, what'd that paper say? Am I supposed to be her slave now? But she was smart. She knew that if anybody saw me being taken care of by a white lady, they suspect her of being on that Underground Railroad. So I worked hard for her all day, and that night, her husband come and put me in a wagon and took me to the next station. And so on at night until I got to Mr. Thomas Garrett's house in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, Mr. Garrett, he's a Quaker man and a big businessman. Had hardware stores and all sorts of things. But he helped fugitives. He kept a record and helped over 2,000 make their way to Philadelphia to freedom. And you see, what he did for us really needed doing, because he cleaned us up. We would have baths and get all that dirt off of our bodies, and he'd give us clothes to wear. And we get our hair combed and brushed and washed so that we could look like free Negroes when he gave us tickets on a train to ride into Philadelphia. And when I got off that train in Philadelphia, I felt like I saw God's glory everywhere, just like gold dust shining on me and on everything. And that's when I looked around and realized I didn't know anybody in Philadelphia. Everybody I knew and who loved me was still in Maryland on the Eastern Shore. And that's when I decided that if I was free, they's gonna be free too. And I was gonna go back and get them till my whole family was free. Now, I couldn't just up and do that. I needed to have money, and so I worked in Philadelphia, and I come up with a system that I did for just about a little over 8 years. I would run to Maryland and run that Underground Railroad, and I never lost a passenger, and I never ran my train off the track. So what I do is work up in Philadelphia through the spring and the summer, and then when I got word that someone in my family was ready to run, then I'd go on back down. And I knew how to move through the marshes and through the rivers and get all the way down to Dorchester County. And I would go in the winter. And that's when we would run. Now I'd wait until the moon was right and the nights were the longest, because that's when we had to run. And then I'd set up a rendezvous, usually in a black cemetery, because if white folks see black folks gathering in a graveyard, they ain't gonna pay that no mind. And so that's usually where I would say we would meet on a Saturday night. It's always a Saturday, because that gives us time. If you weren't there when it was time to go, you just didn't go. But we would run all Saturday night to the first station, and then they'd take care and hide us during Sunday. And back on the Eastern Shore, they very often let us go off the plantation to visit our families in other plantations. So they didn't think much about it when you weren't around on Sunday. So Sunday night we run again, and then on Monday they start to wonder where you are if you aren't working. And that's when they realize you run away. So they go to the newspaper on Monday and write out an article, a little advertising about who had run away and what you look like. But that didn't come out in the paper until Tuesday. So you could run again on Monday night and have 3 nights head start on them chasing after you. And so I would go on like that. And most often I'd go to Mr. Guy's house again, and he'd get us a train into Philadelphia. But it wasn't but a year after I started doing that our government passed that fugitive slave law that said that you were a slave all your life, and if you had run away, they had the right to take you back to your master in the South. So we couldn't run anywhere in this country. And I'd have to go on up from Philadelphia, take them to New York, on up till we got to Rochester. And then we'd take a train, cross seeing the Niagara Falls, into St. Catharines in Canada. And that's what I did. I'd sometimes take 1 or 2, or the largest group I ever took was 11, and I said I was never going to do that again. Too hard to hide 11 people during the day, take care of them all. So I did that until I got word that they figured out that my daddy, Ben Ross, was a part of the Underground Railroad. I know everybody thinks that it was just white Quakers that was helping us, but it was white people of all kinds, and it was black people, free, and some still enslaved, helping other slaves get to freedom. And I knew once they figured out that Ben Ross was on the station master that my daddy wouldn't have long to live. So I got some money together, and that's the only trip I went down in the spring. But I went down and I got them and rigged up an old mule and a wagon, because they was too old to be running. And I brought them on up to St. Catharines. And that's where we stayed until the Civil War began. That's when I moved to Auburn and helped out the Union Army too. I did one more trip after my parents came through, but then I stopped, because what I had set my mind to do was to bring my family through to freedom. And finally, after, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 trips or whatever, I had them all. And so that's when I stopped. But I've had other work to do, and right now I'm living up in Auburn, New York, taking care, and now they're no longer fugitives. But you got to understand, when you've been a slave all your life, you don't understand how to live free. And they still need to learn how to do work that they can get paid for, and how to keep their bodies clean and sleep in a bed instead of on the floor. All those things before they're ready to go out and be on their own. So, I've told you a little bit about my growing up in Maryland, and a little bit about running on the railroad. You may have some comments or questions about things I've said or things I haven't been able to tell you, because I want to share with you things that you want to know. So I'll take this time now to hear any questions. This lady right here on the front row.
What about your mom? What happened with your mom?
Oh, what happened with my mother? Well, my mother should have been freed when she was 40. That's what it said in the will of her first master. But if you're a slave, you don't have any say. You can't say, hey, go back there and read that will and free me. So it took my daddy, who was freed. His family honored, his master's family honored the will, and he bought her for, I think, $25. So they were free. And living together at Master Thompson's, that's where my dad had worked, did the lumber. And I don't know if she understood when she was finally freed that my daddy was involved with the Underground Railroad. But by the time I came to get him, she understood that. And they died just, well, she outlived my daddy by about 7 or 8 years. Just a few years ago, she passed. But they lived with me in Auburn. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, now I'm confused. I didn't understand. He has a yeah.
About your first husband, what happened to him, and did you ever have any children?
My first husband, John Tubman, well, he was the first one I went back to get. I bought him a suit of clothes with my money, and I went down there, and I knocked on his door. He was so shocked to see me. Harriet, he said, what you doing here? And I said, I come to get you, John. We can be free together up in Philadelphia. And he said, oh, I'm free now. And besides, I took up with this other woman named Caroline. So I dropped him out of my heart right then and there. And I had to wait until I found some other people who were ready to go, because it's a hard decision to decide to run. And I didn't hear about him until, must have been, 20 years almost after I ran, that he'd been killed. You know, he got in some kind of fight with a white man, and they killed him. So when he died, then I was free to marry Nelson, which we did. Oh, she also asked about children. Nelson and me, we adopted a little girl named Gertie. I never had children. I wasn't lucky enough to have any with John. And I just am beyond childbearing now that I'm married to Nelson. Yeah.
After you stopped bringing people up on the railroad, didn't you preach in churches?
I've talked in a lot of churches. I've told my stories, sometimes, you know, in just a little living room with just some ladies there for the Abolitionist Society, sometimes for big gatherings, but I've never been a preacher in a church. And there's a young man way in the back there has his hand nice and high.
After you went to Rochester, is it Rochester? Sorry. After you went to Rochester, did you stay there or did you go somewhere else?
Rochester would be the last stop before we cross over into Canada. And you'd have to stay there until no matter how many people you was hiding, you'd have to stay there until they said it was safe for you to cross over. So we'd be hiding all the time, and people risk their lives to take care of us. And you know, probably the most famous person we ever stayed with in Rochester was Frederick Douglass. And sometimes we'd be there a few days and sometimes for weeks before we could get the train across them Niagara Falls. Oh, okay. Let's go.
Harriet, how many people do you think you brought through on the railroad, and what was your scariest experience in doing that service?
Well, people asked me that before. So I have counted up, but I'm not real sure you count all them little babies and things. It's between 60 and 70 people I brought through over them 8 years. The largest number that you could say I brought them to freedom was during the Civil War. The Combahee River raid that we ran, we had 300 black soldiers that went up the river, and we burned out all these plantations, and all them slaves were ready to go. And they come out to our gunboats, and we took them back down, and when we got back to Port Royal, we counted up 750 contraband. So that was the largest number. And scary. I don't know if I was ever really truly scared because of who God is and what He did for me. He would tell me, I know that I needed to pay attention because He'd make my heart go real fast and bumpy like, and then I'd hear Him. And sometimes He would tell me, you best get off the road now, Harry. Take these people off this road and back over toward that creek yonder. And as we was doing that, I would hear the paddy rollers on the road over there. And I knew that God was watching out for me. And you're always scared when they get scared. There was one time we had to cross a river, and most of us don't know how to swim. I certainly don't know how to swim, and I was too little, but God had told me to cross this river, and these two men, they didn't want to do it. They were ready to go back. And I said, if I get across, you follow just where I went. And I went through that water, and it come up to here. And I would just barely make it fighting against that current. And when I got over there, I just looked at them. And they came on. They came on. You can't let anybody go back. I carried a little bag every time I made a trip, and I kept a gun in there, just a hand pistol, handgun, and I never had to use it. But I did threaten people with it if they was going to turn back. Because if you go back, they'll get some information out of you that will just end the whole train that you were taking, and the people who were running for their lives. And one time there was a man who just didn't believe I was going to shoot him. Well, he was right about that. But I gave that gun to another fugitive, and I said, if this man turns and runs, you shoot him, because it's going to be the end of your life and your family if he goes back. Well, he believed that man would shoot him, so he came on. But you got to do that. You can't lose anybody. But I did use a gun for my toothache. I had a toothache that was killing me. And I thought, dear Lord, how can I end this toothache? I cannot let these people down. I was right in the middle of the marshes there, leading people to freedom, and I didn't think I could take another step. So I decided to get rid of that tooth. And I took that gun by the barrel and just knocked out that painful tooth, and oh, I felt so good. And I was able to continue to run.
Was there a time of year that, I'm sorry, right here.
Oh, thank you.
Was there a time of year that you did this, or was this throughout the year you would take people from the south to the north? Or was there a season that you did it?
A season where I always took people from the south to the
Yeah,
north.
in other words, did you not run the railroad in the winter because it was too difficult through the weather, or?
If somebody get word to me that they ready to run, what they would do, what I would hear is, next time Moses come, take Joe Bailey or my sister Rachel. I went back several times thinking I could get Rachel, but her children were rented out. She didn't know where they were. She wasn't going to leave without her children. So she was one of the last trips I was able to make. But I always do it in the winter. Always. I get down there, I hope to leave sometime in December. Not much later, because then the days already start getting longer. I mean, yes, the days are getting longer, the nights are getting shorter. I need the long nights. Yes.
Canada approached you, or how did you, when you crossed into Canada, what were people like for you there? Were they accepting?
I'm sorry, I stood in under. How did people
When you
approach-
were crossing over into Canada, was the government in support of enslaved Americans going to Canada, the Canadian government?
I need a
Was Canada welcoming to you?
Ah, thank you. I'm sorry. Sometimes you get old and your hearing just doesn't work well for you. But yes and no. We never had fear of being enslaved again, and they was willing to sell us land, and we built us a church, and we could live and work and earn money. But there was people up there that didn't think that we were human or something. You know, they were not all friendly. Yes.
You change your name from Minty to Harriet, and why?
Oh, well, I decided when I was a woman, I was going to have my mama's name. And I just expected that to be so with John Tubman. And so when I married him, I changed to Harriet. And I always went by Harriet. She went by Rit. Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't know if maybe one more question, and then somebody else is going to be coming up here to try and answer your question.
I just have one more question. When you were on your travels, was it very important for you to be able to find the quilts that were hanging and the different signs along the way that said that you were welcome and you knew? And how did you let other folks that were thinking about leaving know about those signs along the way and what to look for?
You asked a lot of things there. Okay. Every time there was a sign or a code, it had to be that one time. You did not want things to always be the same because they figure out that that's the Underground Railroad. So if I was going to leave some people and had to go into town, I'd put on my disguises, I call them, and I'd go into town. I'd say, when I come back, I'll sing Go Down Moses, and I'll clap with it, and that means stay hidden. And then, I'll go away until it's safe for me to come back. I had to set up things like that. And sometimes they'd say, you go down this road here and wait till when you see two quilts hanging on the line, that's the place. Things like that would really help us. Now, I know you asked something else there. Do you remember?
No, I was just wondering how important those signs along the way were, that you knew what your trail was to be because of the quilts and the different things that they had put up for folks to know that that was a safe place.
Yes,
Yeah.
that'd be a safe
But you
place.
were the leader anyway, so you already knew those places. So how was it instrumental with the other people? Did it? Was it?
I helped other people as much as I could. I could tell them what they could expect, what they need to carry. If there's, sometime it'd be 6 days before they get to Wilmington. Sometimes it's 2 days. 2 weeks before they can make it that far. So you need to know what you have to carry in your bag, and you need to know the first place to get to. And then the station masters can take care of it after that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am not sure how much time has gone by, but there is a chance to talk to Becky Stone, the scholar or the researcher, and I can continue to answer questions about Harriet, but I can also answer, questions that she couldn't answer, how she died or whatever, or about my research and the kind of work I do to prepare for this. So please, if you had a question for Harriet, you can still ask me. There's another young person back there standing.
I actually do want to know how she died.
Oh, how did Harriet die?
Yeah.
Harriet, they're never sure when slaves are born, for the most part, that no records were kept. But she died in 1913, and they believe she was 92 years old. And this house in Auburn that she had, it was her dream that it would be kind of a nursing home to take care of poor black people until they died. And the black church and some of the white churches in Auburn helped that to happen. She was able to purchase the land, but they helped her convert it into that nursing home, and that's where she died, in Auburn, New York, in the Harriet Tubman Home for Elderly and Indigent Negroes. It's the full title. So,
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. As I have not been there, but I've talked to lots of people who have, and her home is there. I've asked if they were not aware of whether the expanded nursing home is there, but her home is there, and they're trying to save it and make it a museum. Takes a lot of money, so, yeah.
Becky, I know that you have been with
Who's talking? It helps me. Hi.
I know you've been with this lovely career of yours for more than 20 years.
About?
And I'm thinking about your research. Has it changed in any way over those 20 years in the way you can find more material for someone you're researching new, or is it about the same?
Okay. It changes as historians start to cover this material. When I first started 20 years ago doing these characters, there was no scholarly work on Harriet Tubman. And these two women must have been working on the dissertations at the same time, because within a year, it's like 2004 or something, 2005, they came out with two well-researched books and very readable books. And so then I was able to do Harriet. There's still a lot of questions when I go digging around. They don't know, but they're still finding things. A couple of years ago, they found a photograph of her. And, you know, there were maybe 2 or 3 extant photographs, and now there's another. Occasionally, you know, an old city building or records building will be shutting down, and they'll sift through all those papers, which is not stuff that I would want to do, but they want to do it, so it's lovely. And they find documentation for things in her life. So, you know, I just have to keep up with the news releases on what's been found. And people like Pauli Murray, you know, there were no scholarly books on her when I did her. I did all my stuff based on her own writings. And there have been like 3 or 4 books recently. So it changes.
Is there anyone that you aspire to become in this form of your career? I mean, do you want to like be, I don't know, somebody else? Or are you going to become someone new in the future, or are you going to continue with the characters that you are now?
Right. I will certainly continue with my characters. I'm working on a new character for June that I've been asked to do. And, you know, I'm considering developing some characters on my own where maybe the research would not have to be as intense, but there'd be an interest regionally. Like I've thought about Nina Simone, because I think she has a really interesting story. But I'm working on a Wild West woman for June, Stagecoach Mary in Montana. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm really curious about your creative process, and I'm sure there's a lot to it, how you transform into these characters. But I wonder if you could share maybe your favorite part of that creative process and what that looks like.
Well, that's 2 separate things. They give me about a year when they ask me to do a new character. And I tend to start with what the character has written about themselves, and then I move to what other people have written. And then I move to the internet, and I don't want to include anything in the presentation that I feel is hearsay or questionable. And then about 2 or 3 weeks, and what I'm looking for as I do the research is the dates. I pack a lot of information. I don't think Harriet Tubman would tell you that in 1808 this country said no longer, now we're breeder states. I just try to give you that information. But then I look for stories that I think are interesting, and I try to incorporate them. I feel like some of my presentations are better than others, more conversational than others, but I try to link the stories, and then I figure out how I want to portray the character. And a lot of it depends on how frequently I do that character before it settles in. But, Harriet was illiterate. And so most of the information I got was from letters that people wrote back and forth to each other. And I didn't collect the letters. They were in these books, And they would say things like her she's mumbling again without her teeth. She's just barely, you can barely understand her. Or, they make comments like that. About all the characters, you can find comments like that. It gave me some clues about how to do the voice. And I would make decisions about how that person might carry themselves. They're all small except for Maya Angelou. I do her. She's like 6 feet. She was 6 feet. And supposedly Mary Fields, it might be hearsay, is 6 feet too. But, Harriet's going to have some strength to her, and even at 65 or whatever. And Rosa Parks is not. She's just going to be physically very demure. And so I make decisions like that. I made this decision that Maya Angelou even commented on how her smile wasn't a real smile. And I looked at photographs and realized that her smile was pulling her lower lip over her bottom teeth. So when I do Maya Angelou, I have to modulate my voice. And you get to hear her voice because she only died in 2014. So, but with theater background, if you have a little physical thing that you do, it really helps you get into the character. So I make decisions like that, and that's my acting background. Most Chautauquans do not have a theater background. They're mostly humanities professors, and that's changing some, but they're still academicians first and acting second. And I think of it as that way because I don't want to give you any false information. Yes?
I just wonder, do you also do presentations with children in grade school, high school?
Yes. I just did Harriet last week at Lucy Herring School, and I did Polly Murray about a month ago at Asheville High. Sometimes, for the upper grades, it's for theater classes, but sometimes it's just as additional history or social studies stuff. Yeah. It's fun. Their questions are very different, So it's fun. Yeah.
Miss Stone, I was wondering, is there any record of Harriet's work, official or unofficial, all unofficial, I'm sure, with the Union Army during their campaigns in the Civil War?
Okay, you asked if there was any work, and then the end of the question, I didn't.
So is there any official documentation of her work with the Union Army during the campaigns, the various campaigns in the Civil War?
Oh, the Union Army? Yes, there are lots of records, and both the books that I relied on to get started on Harriet have a section devoted to the raid up the Combahee River. And I found some books where some scholars have just focused on the work in the Combahee River. She went down in 62 and had a lot of trouble. They sent her to Port Royal, which was the Union Department of the South. The Union had been able to take the coast, but not been able to get inland with any success. And the governor of Massachusetts contacted the Secretary of War and said, "We have a woman up here." She was going around talking for the women's right to vote, and as well as the end of slavery, but both of them. And he said, "We have a woman up here who time and time again went into terrain that was very much like the coastal areas of South Carolina. She can get in and out without people knowing and get information for you." And so the governor said, are you willing to go spy for the Union? And she jumped at the chance. And it took her a while to make sure people would take care of her parents and such before she went down there. But she had trouble because she couldn't understand them and they couldn't understand her. They spoke Gullah, and she spoke the most like a white person that they had ever heard a black person speak, and they didn't trust her. They didn't trust the Union Army because they were white. You know, what difference does it make what color coat you're wearing, you know? And so she couldn't stay with the camp. She had to leave the camp. They gave her some money and supplies. She set up her own business and lived among the Gullah-speaking people. And by the time the Emancipation Proclamation came out, then they gave all these white colonels who had black soldiers under them, they finally gave them the chance to fight, and they gave Harriet permission to do her spy ring. And by then, she had a great spy ring. And not only did she plan and then help lead the Combahee River Raid, so all that's well documented, but she also did a lot of nursing and interviewing contraband. They called them contraband because they were property, and you take property in war, it's contraband. And they, even after she begged for the chance to go home and see her parents, and they finally let her go because they wanted her there. She got the most information out of the contraband than anybody. She got more than anybody else by interviewing them. So yes, all that's well documented. It's fascinating reading.
On behalf of the cathedral, thank you. And would you all join me, please, in thanking Becky for her
goodness. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Great evidence. Thank you. Oh, goodness. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. And I thank Harriet as well. Right. Oh, goodness. Okay, let me get this off. Oh. think it's wonderful when kids are, you know, not like stuck in the, they don't want to say anything until they're dancing one day. Good. That's a big difference. It is a big difference. This is my husband, Krista Turner. Hi. Oh, I know. And there was a good question. Thank you.